And what you generally find is a lot of the things that are movements in a political sense that express themselves in the public sphere, they always begin in philosophical discussions and they trickle down to the lay people. So what you'll have, I'm obviously, not obviously, but for those of you who don't know, I talk about nihilism a lot. And so my study of nihilism is trying to so where did this idea come from, so on and so forth. And you can sort of trace it back to Nietzsche, and you can even go further than back than that and start seeing it in Arthur Schopenhauer. Is that his name? Arthur? I think it's Arthur. Can't remember his name. Yeah, but so you can sort of trace this thinking back, and then you can see how it sort of develops in popularity, and then the academia start talking about it, and then that ends up in the public sphere somehow, and then that becomes a conversation that everyone is starting to have. So the thing is with this here, for me, the more fundamental question is why do people feel like we have to fall on this? Because this is what's happening now, and funnily enough, it does kind of link to nihilism and the things that I do talk about a lot. But originally, this wasn't an issue, and in the West in particular. And one of the main reasons was because the source of morality for people in the Christian world in particular was the Bible. So in terms of how it ended up developing is this idea that you did have God as being the arbiter of right and wrong at one point in the West. And then what ends up happening is there's a sort of a loosening of the grip of religion. And I like to go into things in terms of the genealogy of its development. And it's a bit of a shot in the dark because obviously this is hundreds of years of history that I'm trying to condense into a little shot of information. But what you see is this sort of development of different thoughts within the Christian West, and there's this huge conflict between Protestantism and Catholicism, and then you've even got the Eastern Orthodox, and there's all these different sort of groups that are developing within the Christian West. They're fighting amongst each other. The Protestant, that develops in the UK, for example, with King Henry, and he created the Church of England. And the Protestants are then developing elsewhere in Europe. So you've got, I think, the Netherlands ended up being Protestant, and there was a few other countries. And there was a huge tension between them and the Catholic world, for example, the French, and so on and so forth. X, Y, Z. There was a number of Catholic nations. This caused a lot of conflict. They ended up moving into the Americas and starting to conquer. For example, the British had the 13 colonies along the east coast of the US, or what is the US now. France was also there, Spain was also there, and they were developing all of these different things. But as well, because there was all these different nations there, and people were coming from all over the empires to the New World, because you've got this vast, magical land that's just ripe for picking. And what this did is it created, for the first time, a crazy mixing pot of people. And they developed, and obviously there's a huge ocean between them and between them and Europe, or them and the world that's to the east of them, and they developed their own sense of identity, which leads them to split away from Europe. It sounds really random, but you'll see how it sort of links to this now. Yeah. So they end up developing their own sort of identity, and the 13 colonies split from Britain, and they start creating their own thing, the United States of America. And in this, they had to start presenting their own constitution, and they had to do it in a way that sort of accommodates this mixing pot of beliefs. Because now it's just the Protestant Empire. Now you have this independent nation that's filled with people from all over the world. Yeah, and it's well, how do we all live together? And they were fed up of the impression of the ruling powers in the Britain and so on and so forth. So they developed this notion of sort of secularism. And from my observations, as far as I can see, it's not that it was necessarily the moral choice per se. It was just a pragmatic decision. We've got this mixing pot of people. We need to be able to sort of live in peace with each other, because we're now we're literally, especially concerning the 13 colonies, they're going against one of the biggest empires in the world. Yeah, Britain was not, the United Kingdom was not like a child in the world scene. They had vast amounts of wealth, power. They had armies, and they were going against them, and this was going to cause huge issues. So they had to think a way of uniting the people that they had, in a way where these religious differences didn't take central role in the way that they organized, so that they didn't have to deal with this infighting, and so they could compete against other big players in the world. And so what ends up happening is you have the development of this sort of secular thinking, of this being free from the rule of certain authorities, and you get the development of lots of ethical thinkers that starts to basically question religion as a foundation. You start moving into like the 19th century, and you get people like Feuerbach, who's a German philosopher who inspired the likes of Karl Marx. And basically he started to critique Christianity, and I think he was like one of the first major thinkers. Feuerbach, I don't even know how to. I think it's like Feuerbach or something. But he develops this whole critique of religion, of Christianity. He starts trying to sort of impose this genealogy of religion being man-made, and how it this idea of God develops, and so on and so forth. And then that starts to spark this sort of trivializing of religion, and you start to see it. And then Nietzsche starts talking about it. And there's a really really good quote, which if I can find, I shall read it to you. So if you bear with me. Nietzsche. Yeah, so here we go. So this is from Twilight of the Idols, by Friedrich Nietzsche. Renaissance Raids of an Untimely Man, aphorism number 5. He says the following: "They are rid of the Christian God, and now believe all the more firmly that they must cling to Christian morality." So this is interesting, because this is what happens: is they start to lose faith in the institution. Yeah, and Protestants, I can never say the bloody word. The Protestants, their whole thing was that they were fed up of the church. So Catholicism has a central authority, which was the Pope, and the Pope was seen as God on earth, or the representative, more specifically speaking, the representative as God on earth, and the church was to be obeyed. The Bible was not something translated into the common tongue. The Bible was held, and there was a monopoly over it by those who could speak Latin, who were specifically the people that were in the churches, the priests, the monks, etc. And then it was them, they would read the Bible, and it was their job to then pass that law, pass that aqidah, that fiqh, to the general people once a week on a Sunday. But there was a monopoly over it, and the Protestant movement was a push against that. It was like, no, it should be translated into the language of the lay people. The lay people should be able to access the word of God themselves and be able to derive their own opinions from this. Yeah. So the Protestant movement was the beginning of pushing away from that central authority. Now, what ends up happening is there's like a sort of distrust of religion in general that's caused, and obviously the Protestants themselves can be quite evangelical or quite firm upon their belief as well. But I think this was like the beginning of the movement of this notion of an authority, of the central authority. Who is it? And then eventually it sort of trickled down to the idea of God as being the authority. And the thinkers like Feuerbach, Karl Marx, etc., when they start pushing this sort of atheism, what you see is this pushback against the notion of God as an authority, because people are just seeing now that if someone says God has said do this, God has said do that, what they really mean, as far as the atheist is concerned, is I think that you should not do this. I think you should not do that. Yeah. But I'm not willing to say that it's me. So I'm going to oppose this upon this being that I have invented, which is called God. And it just started to be seen as equivalent. You hear these tropes a lot within the atheists. like Santa Claus. It's like the Tooth Fairy, etc. It's like a childish way of trying to control the masses.
So basically, for them, it was more like, God is being an interfering interloper in some sense, or some why, and maybe they might have a question that why is he the arbiter? Why can't I be my own arbiter about
Yes, yeah. So it becomes seen as like a form of oppression. But the thing is people have a sense of morality, yeah, that is part of the status quo of a people. And this is interesting. So he said, I'll read the quote and it's sort of, and I'll make a commentary on it as I go through it. So he says, they are rid of the Christian God and now believe more firmly that they must cling to Christian morality, which is a bit of an oxymoron. It's like, well, if you've gotten rid of the Christian God, why would you cling to Christian morality? And he explains it. He says, that is an English consistency. We do not wish to hold it against the little moralistic females Eliot. I don't know what that. So his reference to English consistency is he had a very big distaste for English moral philosophers, like John Locke, for example, and like he was annoyed with them because they would talk about things like, as if there was this clear way of using reason alone to get to like moral principles, and like so he had his own beef with them. But yeah, so in Eliot, in England, one must rehabilitate oneself after every little emancipation from theology by showing in a veritably awe-inspiring manner what a moral fanatic one is. This is the penance they pay there. So like you'll see this with like sort of atheistic activists. They've got to sort of show how moral they are, and there is this push. But the question is well, where is this morality coming from? It is a fundamental question. Exactly. Where is this morality coming from? He says, we others hold otherwise. When one gives up Christian faith, one pulls the right to Christian morality from under one's feet. This morality is by no means self-evident. This point has to be exhibited again and again, despite these English flatheads. So, for example, like the universal human rights.
Yeah.
Things like these are underpinned by theological notions that all men are created equal.
Exactly.
Right? But if you don't have that belief in God, a creator, then men are not created equal. Men are not created at all. They're an accidental clump of atoms and cells.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that develop. So
in fact, there's a very good quote from it. Reminds me a quote from Elijah. He says that the morality of the non-religious man has its source in religion, but in an earlier forgotten religion. The sun has set, but the vomit of the vomit that radiates in the night comes from the sun.
So this is who said that?
Elijah from Islam Between East and the West. The book. So he's
is he a contemporary
philosopher? He's a Muslim guy, I think.
Is he contemporary? He's alive today.
I think so. I
think he's recent.
He's from the 19th century, I think, or the 20th.
Well, you'll see. This is pretty much what Nietzsche is saying here. So he says like, despite Christianity is a system, a whole view of things thought out together. By breaking one main concept out of it, the faith in God, one breaks the whole. Nothing necessary remains in one's hands. Christianity presupposes that man does not know, cannot know what is good for him, what evil. He believes in God, who alone knows. Because you've got to remember, God has a number of attributes here. That he's the all-knowing, the all-wise, he's the just, he's the merciful, he's this, he's that. And when you're putting your faith in this being to decide the best course of action, the best way for individuals and societies and communities to organize themselves and behave and to deal with each other in their interactions, then like if you believe in this being, then it makes sense to put that faith in him, because he's in a better position to dictate the course of actions, because he's not just like with children, for example. They have a very, very immediate sense of how they should behave. And what I mean by that is, if you give a child ice cream, yeah, they'll eat it and they get a good feeling. Yeah, they like that feeling and they go, it's good. It's good. Like that's as simple. You give them broccoli, they eat it and they go, bleh, it's bad. Because they're not thinking past the immediate experience of that thing. When they put broccoli in their mouth, it doesn't taste sweet. It doesn't taste tasty as far as they're concerned. And so like that's as far as their moral considerations are. So I should not eat broccoli because when I eat it, I have this experience of bad, or I have a displeasing reaction to it. Whereas ice cream, I eat that, it is good because I have this good experience, and they're not thinking beyond the immediate experience of the consumption of this thing. So for them, it's good. And then obviously, as you get older, your sphere of consideration pushes further and further. So you're not now just like when I'm looking at my daughter and I'm like, eat your broccoli. And she's like, no. I'm like, you've got to eat your broccoli. I know you might not like it, but it's good for you. Because in my head, I'm thinking, like, I don't want her to get bloody diabetes. I don't want her feet falling off. If she's only eating ice cream and chocolates and sweets, she's going to become obese. She's going to end up with a number of health problems. I'm thinking further down the line. Yeah.
But so you mean to say we have a wider reference, like, a reference point, so we can. Yeah. Okay. Carry on.
Yeah. So I'm considerate of the future, whereas she isn't necessarily, not to the same degree that I am. And she has a limit in terms of how far she can think. In the same way, for example, if me and my daughter start playing chess, my daughter's only 5, yeah. If for whatever reason she can get her head around the rules, and we just take that as a given, let's say she's a little prodigy, she gets how the pieces move. She's not really going to be able to think that many moves ahead. Yeah, if she's a genius as a 5-year-old, maybe she can think 2-3 moves ahead. But 5-year-olds typically, I'm just going to take a shot in the dark and say a 5-year-old typically, if they even could grasp what the rules were, they wouldn't be able to put themselves beyond one move. And not even that, they wouldn't even be able to consider every possibility within the first move. Yeah, they'd go as far as maybe thinking of 1 or 2 things and they pick out a 1. If that, maybe they'll just have an instant reaction. I just want to move that there. And then you put them in checkmate and they're like, oh, didn't see that coming. It's because they're not looking at the board. They're not thinking abstractly in that way, in the same way that we do. But then obviously, as you get older, and there's always an exception to the rule, not everyone is going to be as good as others. But when you're looking at people like Magnus Carlsen, whatever his name is, or Carlsen, I can't remember his name, like the world champion. Yeah, even as a teenager, he was smashing people. And one of the reasons is because he had the ability to really abstractly think about the future, about all the possible variations. If I move here, this person can do move A, B, C, D, E, F, G. And if he does move A, I can do A, B, C, D, E, F, G. If he does move B, I can do A, B, C, D, E, F, G. And then you're looking through like a tree trunks, and it branches out and spirals out, and you can think about things in many different ways. And there's this sort of, but even then, for the genius, there is a limit to how much we can do that. So the question here is about authority. Now, bringing it back to morality, how should we organize ourselves? Yeah, as individuals and as communities and as like a global ummah, as a global community. This is a big question. Now, who is best positioned to make those decisions? Now, when you remove God from the picture, which I don't think you can, but the atheist thinks that you can, you remove God from the picture, the question then becomes which person or which community of people should be in charge of dictating the moral norms of a society, what we should and what we should not do. And there's varying opinions in moral philosophy about who that should be. Anything from just one person, a tyrant, a dictator, yeah, who takes it upon himself. This in Plato's Republic, you've got Thrasymachus, yeah, and Thrasymachus is the he's like, moral is what is the powerful decide. So if you've got some absolute monarch who is in charge of everything, he decides what is right and wrong. Yeah, so you're just putting that power in one particular individual, and then it goes as far as like everyone. So like democracy. We should all collectively get together and hold hands, sing kumbaya, and say, this is how we will move forward as a people. And, if everyone agrees, great. And if there's a disagreement between the community, then the biggest group wins. Yeah, whoever's like got more numbers is going to be So with obviously that's a very simplified version of the two, and you have varying ways that this can express itself between these two extremes, the single or the entire community. Or is it going to be a subset of the community? For example, is it going to be an oligarch? So is it not just one person, but like a team of people? And what are the motivations for this team of people? Is it just because they've managed to fight and attain that power through brutalism, or is it because they are trained specialists in economics and in this and in that, or is it XYZ? There can be a number, but the question is who is it that's going to now dictate the law? Who is going to tell us what is right and wrong? And the issue is when you don't have God, is that you inevitably have to put it into the human being. Yeah, and regardless of the quantity, 1 or 20 or a million, however many human beings are involved in this, there are a number of problems with that, because the human being has a number of attributes that are necessary for them. So, for example, we are finite, we have limited reach, we can only think so far into the future, we have ignorance, we have desires and wants and needs that may conflict with desired outcomes. We've got limited process. We've got biases, limited processing powers. We each have our own world view, and that may dictate certain courses of actions. If you've got a large community of people, all with differing worldviews, differing values, these can come into conflicts and then make it very unclear as to the direction the community should move as a whole. How should we organize a society? Should we allow this? Should we not allow this? Should people be free to burn the Quran, for example, or not? These are questions that you have being expressed in the modern sphere. Now, okay, so just to sort of finish this quote. So he says, when the English actually believe that they know intuitively what is good and evil, when they therefore suppose that they no longer require Christianity as a guarantee of morality, we merely witness the effects of the dominion of Christian value judgment and an expression of the strength and depth of this dominion, such that the origin of English morality has been forgotten, such that the very conditional character of its right to existence is no longer.
I think I missed after the second line. I mean, can you read that again, because I think it
yes.
Buffering.
Okay, so when the English actually believe that they know intuitively what is good and evil, because when you speak to the average person, they're like, it's so obvious. It's so obvious that it's wrong. Why should they're forgetting that like there is a social aspect to these feelings that they have, and this notion, and so it's not something you can divorce from your environment completely, and this bleeds into many different subjects, like the slavery, for example, or so on and so forth, polygyny, the ability to marry more than one wife. So they suppose that it's intuitive what is good and evil, when they therefore suppose that they no longer require Christianity or religion at all as a guarantee of morality. We merely witness the effects of the dominion of the Christian value judgment, or in this case, any religion, religious value judgment, and an expression of the strength and depth of the dominion, such that the origin of English morality has been forgotten, such that the very conditional character of its right to exist is no longer felt. For the English, morality is not yet a problem, or even more specifically, for the Western secular liberal, is no longer a problem, because they'll talk about human rights and they'll talk, but like this is a hangover, from the Western Enlightenment, quote unquote, where they've developed this system of thought that all men are created equal and there are certain rights that are God given and so on and so forth. And they've sort of like removed God from that. But now the question is as well, if they're not God given, who gives them?
Yeah.
And if and why are they absolutes? Why are they absolutes? Why is it the case that this is not like what is it as an, and obviously this is something that when people start asking or going into, reasons for justification start to crop in, and what people generally tend to do is they'll incline towards empathy, and they'll say, oh, but if you're a good person, you'll just feel the same way that I do, you'll just have empathy for the pain of others. And it's like, well, that's a bit circular, isn't it? Like, because what if I don't have that empathy? What if I don't give a crap? What if I'm a psychopath, and it's just, and obviously I'm not saying this is like my feelings, I have empathy for animals and for people, but so there are people in the world that don't, and you saying, oh well, you should do. If they don't give a, who are you? If you're just some random person to them, they don't see you as an authority figure, they're going to ask the question, why am I taking you as an authority? Exactly. Who are you? Who are you?
How does objective just because you are saying it is?
Exactly. And even then, like, how are you so sure that your course of actions does lead to even the outcome that you want? And I think in terms of like a societal level, when it comes to things like eating meat or just the commandments of the Sharia in general, you have Allah Azza wa Jal, who's in this position where he's the all-knowing, yeah, that he like his dealing with us and the long-term consequences of a particular action, he has complete knowledge of, yeah. We have this limited foresight. And I think in the same way, oh well, to a worse degree, in the same way that my daughter, for example, is like, I want ice cream. Yeah. I don't want that broccoli. She's reacting to these immediate feelings that she has. I think communities like the vegan community, or even extrapolating it further than that, the atheistic, agnostic, political communities in general, in terms of the injunctions that they try to posit, free from the Sharia, free from the guidance of Allah Azza wa Jal, they're going to suffer in the same way, but to a more complex degree, of short-sightedness, of ignorance, as it would do with my daughter, who wants to just eat ice cream and avoid eating broccoli. And this is the thing. It's like trying to see how far your actions can have an impact in the natural world.
Right.
How far can you see out? Certain people are going to be able to see the consequences to a different varying degree. But this is the problem. The human being can only ever see so far. There is a limit to how far they can see, to how much they can comprehend, because they also have to deal with things like ignorance, with short-sightedness. Now, so this is what it comes down to again is, okay, so who is best posited to be able to make these decisions about, in the grand scheme of things, this is something that is good or bad, yeah? Who is in a better position to be able to make that decision? Is any group of humans going to be able to compete with an all-knowing, all-powerful creator? If an all-knowing, all-powerful creator exists, then ipso facto, they're not going to be able to compete, in terms of the injunctions of how to best organize the society. If Allah exists, which we believe he does, and I'm going to say he does, it's not just that we believe, whether or not we believe Allah Azza wa Jal exists, he has these attributes, and he is better posited to be able to make a decision on how we organize ourselves, what is right, what is wrong, what actions are permissible, what are not. And human beings, whenever they stray from that, whenever they try to develop their own systems of thought, always give rise, they think they're doing good, but it gives rise to a problem later on down the line. You see this even with like feminism. All the things that they were crying for in the first few waves, they received, and as they've developed, they've gotten into the workplace and now competing with men, and now there are a number of consequences from that action, which the first injunctions were meant to protect them from in the first place, and now they're complaining about it. So they, the harassment in the workplace, so on and so forth. These are problems that are going to express themselves.
Then they're also not being satisfied. Like studies like Banch Flower also prove that now their happiness levels have gone down since the advent of feminism.
Exactly. So they had, in this idealistic way of thinking, they think, if we do this, then this is going to increase this and blah, 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 blah. But there's only so far that their considerations can go. And it's often the case that reality just comes and bites you in the butt.
And it makes sense, as you mentioned, that, we as trying to remove God out of the equation can lead to short-sightedness in some sense, and, come with absurd conclusions. Which we might think that is plausible enough, but in the long run, maybe in the grand scheme of things, can have an adverse effect on the environment, on us, on society at large.
If you are looking for a sense of meaning, for a sense of purpose, Islam is a very convincing religion, and if you do give it, because a lot of people bat religion off wholesale, because especially in the West, they have a bad experience with Christianity, they think it's absurd, and they just sort of brush every religion with the same brush then. And Islam just really isn't equivalent at all to Christian Trinitarian doctrine, for example. The concept of Tawheed is way more palatable to the average person. And I think if you can overcome these sort of prejudices against religion wholesale, and you do give Islam a go, and you at least try and read the Quran. So, in terms of the equivalence, it's not the same. Islam is not like Christianity. We have a book that has been preserved from the time of the companions of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We have Tawheed, which is a coherent understanding and view of our Creator that doesn't give rise to the contradictions that you see present within ideologies like Christianity or Hinduism. It gives a better explanation of the existence of notions of justice, of why we exist, of our purpose and our meaning, of our interactions, relation to animals, all of these things, than atheism, than the alternatives. If you give it its due and look into it, I think you will find that Islam makes a great case for its truthfulness. And it is something that can provide you with that meaning that you're looking for. It can provide you with a sense of justice. It can provide you with that guidance, not just for you, but for your family, those who come from you.